So basically now we're just going to tie that same 4-loop knot. We have 2 eyelets here. I got an eye on the top of my jig, swivel underneath the weight, and I'm essentially just going to do that same exact knot that I did before. Very, very simple, easy to do. So we go through the swivel once, go through the swivel twice. Make sure you always go through your swivels and similar types of gear twice, because you got to have that bumper. You can't do a single strand. It's too much pressure on a single bend in your line. So you do it twice. It gives it that extra insurance and helps disperse the load. Okay, we elongate that out again and cinch that down. Okay, don't use your teeth, use your pliers. So we tighten that up. Okay, now we're basically on the lead. Okay, now that I have my leader secured to my weight, I'm gonna go ahead and tie my jig on. But before I do that, because it kind of gets in the way if it's already secured to the jig when I want to put on that dropper. So I like to tie the dropper onto the jig first, and then I'll go ahead and secure my jig to my leader piece underneath my weight. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. I want you to take a second, reach down there on the right hand side, hit that subscribe button, leave us a comment in the comment section. You'll never miss a segment or an episode of Fish Hunt Northwest on the water, in the woods, or a live presentation. Click that subscribe, do it now. So first, let's tie a hook. And a lot of you ask questions, send in questions, what type of hook knot is appropriate? Let me tell you, I for the most part, always tie similar, same style of hook, doesn't matter. The number of wraps I put on the hook either increases the ability for a bait loop, or I can restrict it down a little and not necessarily rely on a bait loop in my hook tie. This one I will tie, even though we're going to put a bead on it, I'm going to tie it so that you can see the more wraps you put on, the bigger or larger your bait loop can be for those instances where you are fishing bait. Here we're going to put a bead on, so it really doesn't matter. So first thing I do is figure out the length of my leader, of course. Then I'm simply going to go through the eye of the hook, and we're going to put a series of multi-wraps on here. The most important one, the very first wrap, must get down in the corner of the eye of your hook, where it goes back against the shank, okay? The reason for that is I wrap that in there and secure it up tight to the very top. That is my bumper that protects the leader basically from when it pulls tight under a fish grabbing it. I don't have this shock factor in slippage of where it's going to get in there, bind, and potentially break off. So that first one goes up in there tight. Now we're going to make a series of wraps, all symmetrical. And again, I could stop right here, 5 or 6 or 8 wraps. And if I secure that through and put the bottom wraps on, I have a very small bait loop. If I just add extra wraps in here, when I'm fishing eggs under a bobber, for example, I'll put a good 13, 14 top wraps on there to elongate out that bait loop. It just makes it easier to grab when I want to put bait in the loop. So put your running end back through the eye. Don't drag it all the way through, because you just have to work around it. So nice and short. We put that down against the shank, and we're going to put about 3, 4, 5 wraps underneath that just to secure it in place. And again, this is fluorocarbon. You can wet it if you want to. I just make sure I don't pinch it real tight when I drag this through, and it slides through relatively easy, doesn't drag against itself, and certainly doesn't mar it up to where it gives any weak points or creates any heat. If you press that, if you hold that real tight on your wraps as you're dragging that line through there, you create heat and friction, and that's what can damage your fluorocarbon. So as long as you don't cinch it up too tight and drag that through too fast, you're not going to create heat. You're not going to weaken your fluorocarbon. So no worries there. Okay, we're going to cut that tail end off. Now I have my hook ready to go, and we're going to rig it for a bead. Now these bead stops, little T rubber ends are fantastic. I recommend using those for your soft beads. They work really, really well, and they're very easy to put on. Simply put the leader through the eye of the wire, and we're going to drag this T-stopper on there and slide it down into place. Just that simple, okay? So there we have that in place now. Come back, grab the end of our leader, put our 12mm bead on here. It's already got a pre-manufactured hole in the bead, so I don't need a needle or anything like that. We're just going to slide this on down to the T-stop and pop it in there. Okay, now that's basically ready to fish. If I wanted to bobber dog it or fish it in any fashion, even if I wanted to fish that in a vertical presentation under a float, which it will basically do just hanging underneath a jig. So either or, the same, it all works. Now we're just going to show how to secure this leader onto this jig, because the jig is designed to have a leader coming from the top of it through the eye, so the jig fishes horizontal. Okay, if I tie extra rigging to the back side of this hook, it tends to take your jigs and they'll fish more vertical in the water column than they will horizontal. Okay, fish will still hit them when they're like that, but the bottom line is jigs are designed to be fished horizontal, perpendicular to your leader. So we want to try to keep them in that orientation. So if I'm going to hang anything underneath my jig, an extra leader with a piece of bait or a bead, for example, or even a micro jig, sometimes you want to fish a 1/32 ounce little micro jig under your main jig. That has worked for years. You want to somehow secure this towards the head of the jig, but not compromise your ability to hook it, connect it to your leader. So there's a real simple way to do that, and it's basically using that same multi-wrap knot that I use for most of my rigging. Okay, so right here at the head of the jig, I'm going to lay this in here. We're going to wrap it twice. Again, you got to ensure that bumper. So we wrap just behind the head of the jig twice, okay? And secure that line in there nice and tight. And now I have the working end and the running end. So again, we're going to make 4 loops. Just make sure I orient it just right so that I'm going under and over on my wrap. So there we go, under, and here we go over. Pinch that between the fingers. Get the first one, the rest of them will go pretty easy, okay? Stack it in there. There's 2. Here's the third, okay, and the 4th one. 4 wraps stacked in there. Now again, we're going to take this, come up through the bottom, just like so. Pull this out. Remember, elongate the knot. Don't just cinch it down on itself. Elongate it. Make sure you don't put it down too tight, because again, this is fluorocarbon. So you just want to work this back and forth till it cinches up nice and tight. Pull this tail in, secure that. Okay, come in here with your scissor and trim this off nice and tight. Make sure you cut the right one, obviously. Okay, so we secure that. There we go. That's on there nice and tight. It's towards the head of the jig. It's double wrapped around the shank of the hook behind the jig head. It's at a very strong point. That knot doesn't put excess pressure on that line when it's under pressure from a fish. Okay, I've caught many fish that way. Doesn't ever seem to want to break right there. So now when I secure this to my leader, that bead will hang under that jig in a vertical fashion, and the jig will sit in the water column perpendicular, okay? Exactly as it should. Now let's grab our leader end real quick, just to complete this entire presentation. Now that the bead is secured underneath it, I can go ahead and secure this jig to my leader, to my overall presentation, because, I get that in there, because it's not in the way. And again, 4 loops, under, over, went through the jig again twice to put that bumper in there, okay? So there is 4, run that through. Again, elongate, slide it down before you make it too tight. Don't heat up your fluorocarbon. Cinch this side as well and snip that off. Okay, now that everything's in line, let's see what that looks like hanging vertically. So here's our float. Got our depth indicator to know that our float has maxed out against our stopper. Let's go ahead and make this float fixed by sliding up that bottom bobber stop. So now my float is pinned at a depth that I preset. Half-ounce float, quarter-ounce inline sinker to my leader, okay, to my 1/8-ounce jig, and to my, basically to my dropper bead underneath that jig, okay? So when it's fishing, it's all going through the water column. I'll slide this down here so we can see it. It's all pretty much just traveling through the water column, just like that. Okay, so there you have it. That pretty much covers everything from securing the top shot to your braid via that same multi-wrap 4-loop knot, all the way down to securing this bead underneath our jig. Similar same knot throughout the entire presentation, albeit the obviously the hook wrap is somewhat different. That'll pretty much do it for us here in the Bait Lab. Got any questions or comments, make sure to hit us up on our Facebook page, Fish Hunt Northwest, and or go to our webpage, fishhuntnw.com. Leave us comments or questions there. I'm actually going to put this all into a blog for your reading pleasure, so that'll all be spelled out in a blog soon to come, to fishhuntnw.com. And check out our online store just in time for Christmas. Get all your goods and wares via our webpage, and check out all the blogs and information we got going on there as well. All right, we're going to jump out for a quick break. We come back, we'll be back in studio, close out the show.